The Nomiki Show.
We have been talking about rent for several weeks now, nonstop, and mostly because most of us are renters, especially in New York City. I want to start off with reminding folks that the New York Times decided to prioritize asking a question about to all the mayoral candidates just a few months ago. What do you think the average cost of buying a home is in Brooklyn? And my immediate thought was, who the hell buys homes in New York City? Why aren't they asking what the average cost of rent is? But then what it did was it exposed just how ridiculous our slate of mayoral candidates were, just out of touch in that they were mostly homeowners who also didn't understand what the cost of buying a home was. Sia Weaver is well known in New York City for being a housing justice tenant organizer. She is a campaign coordinator for Housing Justice for All. She's been a campaign researcher, a tenant organizer, and a housing policy advocate in New York State for over a decade. Sia, thank you so much for joining us. You just authored a piece in Jacobin called New York's Cancel Rent Movement Isn't Over. I sure as hell hope not. So Sia, I mean, this is a New York centered topic, but I think it, a lot of folks can look to New York and say, how can we look to New York as a model and potentially learn lessons from the failures and successes of the organizing that's been done around housing justice. So I guess let's just start off with, we have keeping the Cuomo situation out. I mean, obviously it's relevant, and we will talk about that later in the show. But we have a Democratic Senate now, and a Democratic Assembly, and a housing crisis, a very clear housing crisis that is inextricably linked to the real estate industry. You'd think that maybe folks would understand canceling rent, but it seems like it's polarized the city. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think it actually goes back a lot farther than just the last year. It goes back for decades and decades and decades and centuries. Our entire sort of country is set up around the rights of property owners and not around the right to housing. So that's probably like the foundational ideological challenge here. But shorter than that, let's start in maybe 2019. We were successful at passing very strong rent control reforms in Albany, and landlords really started organizing. I think it sort of shocked the real estate industry just as much as it shocked the political establishment. Those are the same thing, just as much as it shocked us, how much we were able to win in 2019. And we really started to see backlash right away, landlord organizing and backlash to that victory almost right away. And, cancel rent was just, I guess, a bridge too far for them, right? I think some people see it just as sort of like a polarizing rhetoric. Some people see it as like completely unrealistic. But it was a polarizing message that really activated our opposition, that conjured up images of the mom and pop landlord and really, brought people out of the woodwork to fight back against it, which was a little bit surprising.
Okay, so surprising. Why is that? I mean, real estate is so powerful that I can speak from experience. You don't talk about it in a campaign because they'll come after you. No, but really, I mean, it is sort of like the third rail in New York City politics. So why is it surprising?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were coming off a big victory because there is this like big Democratic supermajority, because like the tides changed relatively quickly around the question of can you accept real estate money and run for office? I think in 2020, it really felt like we had sort of turned the corner on that. It's sort of now impossible to run for office as a progressive and accept real estate money in New York. But, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And I think some of the backlash to cancel rent was really a rude awakening around that for some of us. The other thing is that cancel rent really exposes some divisions in the coalition that fought for universal rent control. For example, cancel rent is a universal program that would have provided assistance to pretty much everybody. And we were able to, when we were talking about rent reforms and reforms to rent stabilization, there was a political consensus in Albany that really no longer existed for cancel rent. It was a political consensus of liberals and progressives and socialists who all had gotten pretty comfortable with New York's rent stabilization laws. Some see them as an anti-poverty measure because the average income of a rent stabilized tenant is $40,000 a year. Some saw them as like a power building measure because rent control gives you the right to renew your lease and the right to fight for your housing, right? So that was the coalition that was fighting for rent stabilization. And that was a coalition that I think we were really used to. Cancel rent is different, right? Cancel rent is a big, non-means tested universal program that says housing is a human right. So there was a lot of, in addition to backlash from the real estate industry, there was backlash from liberals and moderates in Albany, Democrats who were like, wait a second, like why are we helping those people? And so there is a resistance to universal programs that benefit everyone in the Democratic political establishment. And I think it's short-sighted because in our efforts to make sure that the aid is going to the most needy, which is surely a laudable goal, we make the program so narrow, we make it so hard to access that people can't access it. So those very people that it's sort of perverse that those very people that you're trying to help can't get help.
I mean, you look at these statistics and they're not even completely accurate to this day of how many people haven't been able to pay their rent in the last 6 months in New York City. And it's jarring, including small businesses, by the way. So I just don't understand how they can run away from this at this point because the crisis is impending. You can kick the can down, and everybody likes to, talk about this. But if you're 2 years without paying your rent, how many New Yorkers are going to be able to afford $75,000, $80,000 up of rent? I mean, that's even public housing. If you have a 2-bedroom apartment in public housing, it's still, most likely over $1,500 a month. Yeah. And if you haven't been working, or if you have been working and you're, we understand what the COVID economy has cost us as New Yorkers, but I just don't understand how even the more centrist liberals who are unwilling to, go with the slogan of cancel rent don't understand the concept of cancel rent. Right.
I think it's really interesting. I'm glad you bring up public housing. What Democrats are saying, and what the Albany establishment is saying, is that they actually dealt with the problem. They passed something called the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It's a $2.7 billion pool of money that is designed to pay back rent for people who are eligible, so people who make 80% of the area median income or below. The problem with ERAP is that the program is incredibly difficult to get access to. It takes on average 2 hours to apply. There's no save and resume button, so you have to sit down and do it. You have to upload all your documents. You have to include photo IDs for everyone who lives in your household, including children. And the website is constantly crashing. And this sort of scenario, this sort of like program that we can't access. I mean, like this was supposed to be the pragmatic alternative to cancel rent, right? That you're going to create a pretty standard voucher-based rental assistance program that's paying the back rent that's accumulated over COVID-19. It's not working, right? So it's crazy that like the simple solution, cancel rent, where landlords are just going to apply for the aid directly and go get it, would have probably been a hell of a lot easier, at least that's what I think, than what they did instead, which is a sort of Byzantine bureaucratic nightmare. You can't even get to the website. So it's sad. But public housing, I think, is a little, and I think you're absolutely right. It's not just that the back rent that's accumulated. The back rent is, of course, accumulated, but it's also that people aren't working moving forward either. So even if your job comes back tomorrow, how are you going to get the $75K to pay what came before and then pay the rent moving forward, right? Like we're in a more permanent recession, and we need permanent housing programs that can really grapple with the recession that we're in right now. public housing, in public housing, people pay 30% of their income in rent no matter what. And the government is supposed to fund the difference between that and the operating. The problem with public housing is that, it's been divested in for so many years. So when the rents go down, which they have done because of COVID-19, rent collection has gone down dramatically. There's been no increase in funding from the federal government to make up for that loss in rent and make up for the 40 years of backlog and capital repairs that the agency desperately needs. And so, housing is not free. Money has to come from somewhere, and it has to come from the federal government.
I'm like really struggling with understanding why big real estate is fighting this so hard. We talked about Christopher's today about who's the author of Rentier Capitalism and talked about the monopolies and the monopolies taking advantage of the smaller landlords. But is it just about sort of this sort of disaster capitalism approach to the economy? I mean, what they need renters, and if people are evicted, like who's going to rent? And also, just adding to that, for folks who don't live in New York, the amount of effort, even with the new reforms that have been passed and then reversed in some cases, it's really hard to qualify for rent. If you have a red mark on your record, good luck getting a lease after this economy. So, what is their path forward? Who are going to be the renters if everyone's evicted?
Very good question. I think it's about power, right? I think, like everything, it's about power. It's about a sort of like deep ideological commitment to property rights. And even when it's not in their economic best interest, what they want to do is pursue eviction because they, it's like your property right is like inalienable. I don't know how to say it. You know what I mean? People, they don't want it to be taken away from them. And so there's just like, it's a real power. It's about exerting power over the tenant. It's my property. You don't get to stay there. It's not your house. It's my building. And even though that's against their economic self-interest, that is what they want to do. And we see it time and time again.
So, all right, we do have this little crisis happening in New York right now about who is the next governor going to be if Cuomo steps down, which is likely to happen, and our Kathy Hochul from Western New York will likely become at least the interim governor until the next election. Okay, with all that being said, the dynamics in Albany are always very, very, very important for these kinds of conversations. Do you see, just given the potential, even the weakness of Governor Cuomo, like forget about whether or not he's out of office or not. Do you see this as an opportunity? Like, is there a wedge moment to come in and say, you've created this monster, especially in light of the national conversation about the eviction moratorium that Cori Bush has been praised for really fighting to extend? Is there like sort of a moment where we can, come back and flip this around?
I hope so. I always believe that there's a moment, especially when people are organizing to the degree that renters are organizing. It's important when we think about Andrew Cuomo to think about who hasn't called for his resignation, and that is, of course, REBNY. They're one of the only major political players that hasn't. And
what is REBNY?
Real Estate Board of New York. Yeah. So real estate is sticking with the governor. And so I think both this moment that we're in right now with the eviction moratorium about to expire, but also the next 6 to 8 months where there will be a gubernatorial election, no matter what, whether he's impeached, whether he steps down, whether he decides to run for re-election, there is an election happening. And the election is going to be about Cuomo's legacy. And it's going to be about whether or not it's going to be candidates distancing themselves from Cuomo's legacy. So his legacy is very simple and straightforward to me. It is gentrification. It's giving away massive corporate tax breaks to developers like of Hudson Yards, of and Buffalo Billions, these like big corrupt real estate projects where Governor Cuomo is just handing the keys to develop the state to his real estate donors. That his legacy is that 92,000 New Yorkers are homeless, a number that's gone up by 50% since he took office, right? So this is who he is. And of course, he's also, all the sexual harassment, all of that too. And so what we are going to be saying to candidates and to both, the remaining leadership in Albany, Andre Stewart Cousins and Carl Hastie, who now have a tremendous amount of power.
The assembly leader and the Senate majority leader. Yeah.
The assembly leader and the state Senate leader. We're going to be saying, do you want to continue Cuomo's legacy of failed housing policies, or do you want to do something different? We've been successful in that in the past. That's how we've been able to get anything done in Albany. So if anything, the strategy is almost more possible right now.
I'd be reluctant to say they're also like because New York City there's the appearance of progressivism, at least in city council, but there's this sort of game that happens, as we know really well, with progressives or people who want to appear progressive or have coalitions of progressives because of, living in New York City. There are a lot of folks who've come out and said like, okay, I'm no longer taking real estate money. And they have in the past, or they voted with real estate or both, or they say they've no longer taken real estate and they're still taking it. So why is that important? And to me, it's just, this was so infuriating during the mayoral race. I almost lost my mind, but this is so common. And I feel like it's become even more common after 2016 because New Yorkers are see where the tides are going and how things are shifting. But do you think it's going to be as common now with Eric Adams, at least trying to message that, New York is not as progressive as maybe the world thinks, whether or not you and I agree with that?
Yeah. Look, Eric Adams is not trying to be a progressive and he's not trying to challenge real estate. That's pretty clear. I don't know. I think the fact that people change their mind about taking real estate money, or that people are willing to say that they're not doing it, but really they are doing it, all of that is just us being victims of our own success. I don't really know two ways around that. Honestly, people are going to lie. Politicians are going to bifurcate. That's what they do. Politicians are going to obfuscate. That's what they do. That's just a reality of the field and the work that we're in as organizers and activists. Our role is and advocates, our role is to call that out when we see it, build enough power so that it's harder and harder to be fake. But I really see the fact that it used to be just a fringe demand. That's freaking crazy. You can't run for governor without real estate money. You can't run for state senate without real estate money. It became a necessary thing. So all of that, it drives me crazy too. And it's infuriating. And it's yes, you are taking real estate money. Stop lying. But we're victims of our own success. And the only solution is to keep our eyes on the prize, keep organizing, keep building power, keep calling out the bullshit when you see the bullshit, keep, running real people, homegrown, progressive grassroots leaders for office, and keep changing the tide. So it annoys me, but I don't know if there's anything that we can do about it.
All right. What are your immediate demands, your personal immediate demands?
Well, the immediate thing that we need right now is to extend the eviction moratorium. We're calling for the eviction moratorium to be extended until June of 2022. The federal moratorium has been extended, but it's just not as strong as the one that we have in New York. We want to keep our New York moratorium intact. In part because no rental assistance money has gotten out the door. So that's our second demand is we need to get that money in the hands of the people who need it. And then we need more of it. Beyond that, we want permanent eviction protection. So we need to pass the good cause eviction bill at the state level, as well as permanent rental assistance for people who have lost their jobs and their income. I feel like I just said the word permanent 100 times, but permanently because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we actually need we know that the way to survive crises like these are to double down on safety net programs, not to make them more and more temporary. So that's what we're demanding.
If folks want to help out in New York, what can they do?
Well, we've got a lot of upcoming events. So on August 10th, we are going to be having a rally in downtown Manhattan at 250 Broadway. And we're doing the same thing on August 11th and then on August 19th. So we've got like 3 upcoming rallies. You can call your state legislature and demand that they go back into session, not just to impeach the governor, but also to extend the eviction moratorium. And we're having like a party and a celebration and a sort of like honoring of our work too, as Housing Justice for All on September 9th. So that's going to be somewhere in New York City. I don't have a location yet, but our upcoming events, and you can check them all out on our social media, Twitter, Housing for All NY, Facebook, or you can sign up for our mailing list.
Go check it out. C. Weaver, thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
Keep up the amazing work. Hope to see you again soon.
Talk to you soon.